In this video, we're going to be talking about domain and range. As it says up here in the top, we look here, and domain is a function, a domain of a function are the x values. Okay, so domain is the x, or the independent value. Range are the y values, the dependent values. Okay, now we also know that we've had, let's go back to the last units of what we've talked about. We know that we have the dependent, oh, I have it on the highlighter thing. Let's try this again. Let's try and erase this real quick. Okay. The dependent depends on the independent. Now I also know that the dependent variable is the y, the independent is the x. So same thing, y depends on x. Well, we can go as farther with that and add in there that we know that the range is the y, so the range depends on the domain. So if we look back up here, we have right here the range. Every time I see range, I'm going to write y above it. Every time I see domain, I'm going to write x above it. So right here, range depends on the domain, just like dependent quantities depend on the independent. Now, what I say to do, every time you've got a table, any kind of table with data in it, so for example, well, let's see if I can get all my chords right here so we can start writing. Whenever I have, let's see, come on now, all right, a table, and say I've got hours and miles. The first thing I normally go to do is I label up above it, I have x, then y, I write independent and dependent, and again, just like over here, let's see here, I would write this here where it says the independent is the x, and the dependent is the y, that's the range. Okay? So this way, if I write this before every test, or at the beginning of every test, if I go through and write this, then I automatically can go back and do the questions and come back and double check so that I don't get confused. Now, if you notice, let me erase this over here. All right. When we're writing the domain, all we're doing is listing the x numbers. Now instead of writing out domain all the time, you'll write D and then you'll make these little squigglies. Now I'm going to talk about the little squigglies. These little squigglies right here, I don't draw them the best, but as long as you make them squiggly, that'll be good. This is called set notation. And so all we're saying is that all these numbers right here are in the domain set. And then again for range, you don't have to write the word range out all the time. We just kind of put R, use the squigglies, and write it like that. Okay, next. We already talked about that. Okay, so right here, to find the range of a function, again, I would underline the word range and I would write Y. Now I underline domain and write X. I always start out like that. Now the next thing you see is this f parentheses x. That's this stuff here, up here, f parentheses x. You say that f of x. F of x is the same as y equals. So if I wanted to rewrite this, I could rewrite it as y equals 2x plus 1. Now, it says substitute each of those domain values in for x and solve for y. So what you're actually doing right here is you're going to take this number here and I'm going to substitute it into the equation right there for x. So let me come down here and I want to write 2x plus 1. Now what this is saying is 2 times x plus 1. Okay, well, I want this saying I'm going to use x to be negative 2. So I'm going to come over here and put negative 2 in there. Okay, multiply these two together. I get negative 4 plus 1. Y equals negative 3. There's your y value. Well, that's for the first one. Now, go back over here. Let's go 2x plus 1. The next one, it has a 0. So let's substitute the 0 in there for x. So I've got 2 times x plus 1, 2 times 0. Well, anything times 0 is 0. I have 0 plus 1. Y equals 1. Over here, I'm going to use the next one, 2x plus 1. This time I'm going to put in there 3. So I have 2 times x plus 1. Well, I'm going to put in here the 3. That's going to go right here. I have 2 times 3 is 6 plus 1. Y equals 7. So now to write my answer, they wanted to know the range. Range equals, I've got negative 3, 1, and 7 in my set. Well, let's do another one to practice here. Let's see if I wrote, what is the range of f of x equals 3x plus 2 when the domain is, the domain is negative 2, 0, and 3. Okay, pause the video, try and find these answers, and come back and see how you did. So, I have y equals 3x plus 1. Okay, my first one right here is going to be negative 2. So I'm going to go over here and it says 3 times x plus 1. Right here it's negative 2, so I'm going to put this in here, negative 2. 3 times negative 2 is negative 6 plus 1, which y equals negative 5. So there's my first one. The next one, y equals, the next one I have is 0. So I've got 3x plus 1. Y equals 3 times x plus 1. 3 times 0. I have y equals 0 plus 1. Y equals 1. The third one up here, that's a 3 in my crazy writing, trying to squish it in. Y equals 3x plus 1. Y equals 3 times 3 plus 1. Well, 3 times 3 is 9 plus 1. Y equals 10. Okay, so if I go to write this, I wanted to know the range. Well, the range equals, and I have my set notation, negative 5, 1, and 10. Okay. Well, now, say if I want to find my answers in the calculator. I'd still go through here and it says find the range. So I'm going to underline range, and range is the y. Domain is the x. You're going to go in the calculator. You're going to press y equals, and you're going to put this in the calculator. To put in a fraction, you're going to press 1 and the divide sign and 2. That's how you get 1/2, or any fraction for that matter. Then you're going to press second graph to get the table. Now when you press second graph, you're looking to see where the x number is negative 2. Here's the x number, and the y number is negative 6. So I'm going to go down here and put negative 6 right there. Then you're going to look and see where x, right here, x is 0. X is 0 right here. Come across, and your y number is negative 7. Next, find where your x number is 2. You're going to come across, there it is, negative 8. Now, you can still do these the same by hand if you wanted to, by putting -2 in here for x. So let's see. Let's go back here and let's do this. Oop, let me see if I can get my pen down here. All right. So I have f of x equals -1/2 x plus 7. And then down over here, I've got, oh no, it's -7. Okay. So let's go here. I have -7. And then, what were my numbers here? They were -2, 0, and 2. And it wanted to know the range. So it wants to know the range when the domain are these numbers here. So go through here and let's see if we can solve these by hand. You can pause the video and come back and see if you can do the right steps. I have y equals -1/2 times x minus 7. The first number I'll put in there is -2. When you multiply those two together, you're going to get a +1 minus 7, which gives me -6. Well, let's look over here. Do we have 2 and -6? We sure do. The next one, y equals -1/2 x minus 7. The next one is 0. Right here, multiply them together. That gives me 0. I have y equals 0 minus 7. Y equals -7. There's the next one. We got that as well. The last one you should have gotten is y equals -1/2 times x minus 7. We're going to take it times 2. Y equals, if you multiply these two together, I get -1 minus 7. Y equals -8. Now, the next one here, you see, this is why I do all the underlining, because you have to be careful. It says find the domain. Find the x when the range, when the y numbers are given. Again, this is the same as y equals -2x plus 6. All right, so what's happening here is they're taking this -10 and they're substituting it in here for where the y would be. That's what we're getting right here. -2x plus 6 equals -10. Then they took the same -2x plus 6 and they put the 6 in there. See, that's where this 6 comes from right here. Then they do the same thing here for the 8. They put the 8 in here because they're putting it in there for y. Solve for x on these three right here and come back and see how you do. All right, so now if I draw my dotted line, first thing I'm going to do is subtract 6 from each side. I get -2x equals -16. I'm going to divide by -2. X equals 8. There's my first one. The next one, I'm going to subtract 6 from each side. -2x equals 0. I'm going to divide by -2. X equals 0. The next one, I have subtract 6 from each side. -2x equals 8 minus 6 is 2. Divide by -2. X equals -1. So when I go to write my answer, it says, what is the domain? So I'll write D equals, use my set notation. I have 8, 0, and -1. Next. Now look, if we use the calculator, I'm going to underline this here, domain. I have to know what I'm looking for. There's the x. When the range, when the y number are these right here. If I were you, the first thing I would do is draw a table. It's telling me the y numbers, so let's put the y numbers in here. The reason why you do this is so that when you look in the calculator, you look in the right column. I should have done that with the other one too. Now you're going to go to y equals. You're going to put 3x plus 4 in the calculator. You're going to put this rule in there. Then you're going to press second graph, and you're going to be able to go and look. Okay, well, let's look first here. When y is negative 11, there it is, it's negative 5 and 4. Okay, so when y is negative 11, x is negative 5, so I have negative 5. Oop, I guess I should write it there too. When x is negative 5, when y is negative 5, my x is negative 3. When y is 4, my x number is 0. And there's how I'd find it in the calculator. Next, talking about domain and range when we have a situational graph. Situational graph, when we have a graph that has labels on it, that's telling us what these numbers mean, when we do domain and range, we have to include words and numbers. The first thing I tell my students to do is when we see down here on the graph, I know that X is domain, so I say to write domain before I read any of the questions. I know that Y is the range, so I'll write range here. You can do that with independent and dependent as well. Independent and dependent. This way, in case if you freeze up on a test question, you can come back and it kind of helps trigger your memory. Now the domain. The domain is the blank from blank minutes. Okay, so in this you're going from 0 all the way out here. Your data ends right here. And if I bring this all the way down, it goes from 0 to 45 minutes. Now you have your range. Okay? Look at your range. What does it go between? Well, I see my range goes up and down here, and it starts here at 0, but where does it end? The graph ends at 5, but not the data. If you draw a line over here for the data, that is at 4.5. So my range is from 0 to 4.5. And see, just like my notes stay down here, notice that the y-axis values are labeled 0 to 5. But the actual data stops at approximately 4.5. So you don't go to where the graph ends, just where the data does. Next, now, let's see if I can pull this over here. Now, a lot of times you're going to have just these ordered pairs right here. When you just have dots everywhere, this is called a scatter plot. Okay, we'll come back to that in a little bit. But the scatter plot, all these points, when they want you to find the domain and range, again, the first thing you're going to do is list the ordered pairs. That's step 1, because there's negative 7, negative 1, negative 4, 1, negative 1, 3, and so on to list the points. Now, the x values are the domain, the y values are the range. So right here, if I were you, I know the domain is x, so I'm going to underline all these x numbers right here. I normally do that first. And then I'll go through and I'll circle my y numbers, or use a different color. It just depends on what kind of pen or pencil I have. But I'm circling my y numbers so that now when I go over here and I have to list my domain, I know I'm using all the ones I underlined. Negative 7, negative 4, negative 1, 2, and 5. The range, negative 1, 1, 3, 5, and 7. This is called a scatter plot graph because it has just dots or points plotted on it. We'll just start with that.